I know definitely one more.
Maybe after you finish a
Did you see those maps that are going to delay politicians? Well, I mean, so
So I'll be on the left, to the left of Sophie, and then Victoria and you can decide which.
Yeah, maybe that's it, yes. I feel like very immediately there. I mean, I'm going to apply it's a very cute Yeah, hopefully. We're looking for someone it feels very complicated.
Unmute us.
Hopefully we'll catch climate change. Yeah.
Hi Alex, how you doing? Thank you everyone so much for coming this evening. We very much appreciate you coming out on a cold and slightly snowy week to join us for this event. My name's Ellen. I'm the head of CHASM here at Demos, which is our dedicated digital research hub. And we put on this event in partnership with the group Challenging Pseudoscience at the Royal Institution, really wanting to kind of unpack some of the issues around public understanding and communication of scientific information and what we do about the problem of uncertainty. So we have, tripping on cables, excuse me, a couple of excellent speakers with us this evening. We have Alex O'Brien online, who is Vice Chair of the Association of British Science Writers. And we have BJ Malenga, who is the Executive Director of Student View, which is a digital media literacy charity. And Will Moy sends his apologies last minute. Personal circumstances meant he wasn't able to join. But really happy to have you all here tonight. We're also joined, I believe, by online people, so hello online watchers. And we have someone who is watching out for any comments or questions that online folks have in the chat, so please do put comments in and get involved in the conversation. So we're going to run tonight. I'll do a bit of an introduction. We'll have some opening remarks from our speakers, and then really keen to open it up to the audience and hear what people have to say and thoughts. We'll probably run for about an hour, and then of course welcome to stay around for drinks afterwards before we'll head home and start thinking about Christmas. So just a bit of kind of background as to where this event came from and where the kind of impetus for this conversation came from. We ran a conference over the summer, also in partnership with the Royal Institution, and that was looking at scientific misinformation quite broadly. What do we do about it? What is it? How do we understand it? How do we tackle it? And one of the key issues that came out of that was really this question about, well, the scientific process, it's inherently uncertain, it's inherently always going to be, the facts are always changing, things are always developing, and so there's always going to be this uncertainty about exactly what is scientific information, what is scientific fact. And that presents quite a challenge, I guess, to the usual way of doing things. So I work a lot on issues around disinformation and misinformation, and often the conversations in those spaces get quite black and white in their thinking of there's true and there's false, there's good information, there's bad information, and if it's accurate, then it should be promoted and people should believe it, and if it's inaccurate, it should be demoted, it should be labelled, it should be taken down, people shouldn't believe it. And the kind of issue around that is how do we deal with the stuff that's in the middle and isn't quite so clear? Obviously, kind of COVID is the classic and very recent example of this. where people's understandings of what it was, how we could mitigate it, masks being the kind of started off early in the pandemic with people saying, well, do they really work? And then that becoming clear over time that yes, they definitely did, but then a lot of kind of uncertainty and conspiracising remaining about the role of things like that. And I think it's a kind of particular issue when we're thinking about how do we bring this information, these discussions into online environments, which are not well designed for nuance, or particularly kind of getting into the details of uncertain information. So a few years ago, one of the first reports I worked on in Demos actually was on public attitudes to research and development topics online, and it was very much what we found was probably what you'd expect, which is that people like to talk about funny, interesting, exciting, shiny science, and they don't necessarily always want to talk about the technical details of peer-reviewed papers, apart from a few scientific subreddits, obviously, which have extremely strict rules about which peer-reviewed papers you are and aren't allowed to post. So perhaps we'll get into the role of different online communities in supporting this shortly. But I'd love to come to BJ first to kick us off with kind of his remarks on where you see the kind of the problem, the challenge of dealing with scientific uncertainty, and how you think kind of from your work on media literacy particularly, how you see that playing a role in helping us deal with the fact of uncertainty.
Yeah, I think a great place to start off is obviously everyone's not starting from the same place. So within our charity, we see surveys and from speak up. Okay, is this better? Yeah. So I think just to kind of go back, one of the things that are quite important to think about is not everyone's coming from the same place. So from a charity standpoint, when we're talking with young people and we're going into schools, we see just how far removed different sectors of society are, depending on the school we go to, depending on the background people are coming from. It's very clear to see just how disproportionate the gap is from people who have access to certain information and people that don't. As we all get older and we're going through members of society and we're now dealing with people at university age, it still rings true. That stuff we see at secondary school is still there. So when you sent over the question, for me and the team, I was asking the team, what's our stance on this? How we can also talk about it as young people, and also talk about the charity landscape, because we're all about trying to make people more literate, give people the tools they need to build their own news stories, understand where news sources are coming from. And a thing that just kept ringing true amongst the network and team for us was you need to kind of start to create more environments where people have access to the same sources. Like open data is out there, but not everyone knows how to use it. You know, FOIs are out there, not everyone knows how to pull them. So one thing that we've been doing as a charity is making it more gamified for the younger generation. So going in and creating pop-up newsrooms, but that doesn't really solve the whole problem because it takes a village to raise a child. So something that also that kind of came back to us when we were thinking about that scientific landscape was, for those people that do have the information, what can organizations like us and other organizations do to take information that they are preparing that is the true information? So for example, Will, who I've met before, has a lot of data. You know, him and his team know stuff. It's like, okay, cool, how do we decipher your newsletter into bite-sized chunks that can be consumed on TikTok for a younger generation? Some of these tools that we villainize obviously have really bad algorithms that can make it addictive. However, it's where the people are at, and it's quite hard to talk to a generation or talk to a few generations who are no longer watching the news at 10 or news at 6 for whatever reason, and expect the way that we used to fight misinformation 20 years ago, 10 years ago work today. I think one thing that the pandemic exposed us all to was the fact that, as you mentioned, it's very easy for misinformation to be spread, especially when it comes to science, especially when sometimes we're not all watching that same source of information. But I think it's the job of people like us who are on the ground, on the grassroots level, and others to start collaborating a bit more, and especially when it comes to the stories we're telling on our newsletter, the stories we're telling in our schools, because I can't sit here and tell you the solution on a national level, but I do know I have a role, and so do the people like all of us in this room right now who are in here, in sparking that change that we want to see in the world. So I think for us, how we inspire young people to spot misinformation from a scientific level is give them tools to ask questions about what they're reading, give them tools to actually find other places of sources of information, so it's not just whatever the Snapchat gallery shows that they should be following as a publisher or whatever comes up in their feed. I think a smart thing that I would notice from social platforms recently has been that kind of like that little bar that gives you question marks, but that's just one portion of where people consume information. I think there's still the other side of things where the conversations that happen in rooms are not recorded. So at a dinner table, around the classroom, in the school playground, in your youth club. And one thing that I was thinking about, I don't want to just talk about the problem, I want to talk about what can we do to support generation, what can we do to kind of solve the problem. I get really frustrated in panels when we're all talking about problems, but what can we do, what's the big idea? Something else that I was thinking about coming in today was from a campaigning perspective, I've not really seen organizations who are all in different fields kind of cross promote stuff unless there's a national day, and we don't have a national day for scientific uncertainty right now. Maybe it's March 23rd, 2020, who knows, but it would be really great to start seeing initiatives where those of us that do care about seeing this change, just like you're seeing momentum around climate change in the last couple of years, and you're seeing momentum around disinformation, which obviously we're collaborating on other stuff at the moment. It would be really cool to start seeing a collaboration between people that have access to large audiences, people that have the data and have the science backing, and then also people that are storytellers kind of coming together to collaborate, because I think the power in some of these things actually just come down to storytelling. A lot of people feel alienated because they can't relate, they can't understand, and they can't see themselves in the story, or they just don't understand what someone's saying. And I think storytelling in a non-boring way and an embodied way is a really important and very simple thing that organizations around the room today could start doing in 2023 to help fight the disinformation that does exist in scientific uncertainty.
Awesome, thank you. I'm definitely going to steal the recommendation for National Day for Scientific Uncertainty. I think this storytelling point is really important, and I think is one of the kind of real challenges around scientific information in particular, because there's kind of the balance to be struck between telling a story that people will listen to and people will engage with, and then when does that get away from, too far away from the sort of technical accuracy of the information, but then if we're too technical, people are just going to switch off and not listen and not understand it anyway. Alex, I'd love to bring you in at this point, obviously from your perspective in kind of science communications, and to offer your thoughts.
Yeah, it was really interesting to listen to Vijay. I'm sorry about the husky voice. We have taken the uncertainty about my germs by keeping me at home, so we made sure that we're not infecting anybody. So thanks for accommodating via Zoom. We have quite a bit of overlap. Well, we have some overlap with what Vijay is doing in terms of educating youth. At the Association of British Science Writers, our main goal is to support our members who are journalists, writers, within the science field, to give them the tools, the resources they need to report accurately, right? And that becomes increasingly more challenging in the environment that we are finding ourselves. So we often run statistics courses to help scientists and science writers and anybody interested that wants to communicate science and science information, and how to interrogate the information that they're given. And that can be as basic as knowing the difference between absolute and relative risk, understanding the difference between mean, median, and mode. These are sort of statistical terminologies, but then also, if we're talking about surveys and large figures, we need to understand people's agendas. Now, why is a figures, if we have, what you touched on earlier is like, stories sell. stories sell because they have a big, large number. But we need to understand why is that? What is there an agenda? Who's telling us a story? Where does it come from? These are sort of basic questions, and I think Vijay was talking about the ability to question and interrogate information. Now, at the association, we support great storytelling. Oh my God, I'm losing my mind. We support great storytelling and support our members to enhance their reporting skills by meeting experts within different fields, by meeting other journalists that have uncovered and interrogated successfully. So what we've also been doing, we've identified that we're kind of retrofitting a lot of this stuff because we're kind of retrofitting.
If you want to take a break or anything, Alex, and get a glass of water, please do feel free.
1 second, sorry. So because as we know, technology and information technology has sort of accelerated at the pace that we haven't been able to catch up with, like with kind of legislation and policies, we just kind of trying to answer and create responses to certain things that are issues for us because of what technology has both sort of provided opportunity, but also a lot of risks in information. So there's that to be beared in mind, but also we felt that as an association who's championing truth and factfulness, and our duty is to be independent and independently reporting truth. And what we'd like to do and what we have done for this year, we launched a Young Science Writer Award because we've identified that we need to start earlier. So education in science literacy and data literacy should start much earlier than what we're doing when people are already in a profession communicating science. So what we're trying to do is engage the youth, and this national award is really trying to get 14 to 16-year-olds to ask the big questions in science and to interrogate, to start thinking critically, and I genuinely feel that this is one of our tasks to start educating society and the public, the general public, because what happens is this sort of gap, right? Scientists and science communicators, scientists kind of relish uncertainty because that's what fundamentally the scientific process is based on, uncertainty, and the questioning of this uncertainty, creating hypotheses, and by accumulating knowledge, we change and getting evidence, we change our framework and understanding of situations. Now that is intrinsic to the scientific process, and scientists have a different attitude to uncertainty because that is their job, this is how it works, whereas the general public reacts differently. And what happens if somebody has already got a certainty about anything, it's very hard to then change their mind from it. So I think educating particularly young children, our younger population, on how science works, what it means, what science works. Science doesn't mean we know it. Actually, science means we don't know it. So, and that could be that could be a way forward, and that's where I see the biggest impact that we could create.
Thank you. And science means we don't know it. This is also going to go on my list of excellent quotes for 2023. I'd love to bring in folks if they have questions. Questions and or comments are welcome. Yes, let's start with Ollie.
Do you want an introduction or just
Introduction and also project, please.
Yes,
and
sure.
Alex, just to say, Alex, I know it might be hard to hear the audience questions. Samaya's going to transcribe things for you so you don't miss anything.
Great, thank you. So I'm Oliver Marsh, I'm a fellow at Demos, but back in the day I did a PhD on science online, science communication online. I'm going to be annoying, it's a comment, not a question, but it's a thing about tone that sort of also links to democracy in the sense of when I was doing my PhD, I looked at people who love science and talk about science on social media, and there is this sometimes risk of I love science, so people who don't love science are wrong and idiots. And instead of being sort of meeting in the middle, there comes a kind of tribalism. And sometimes people who think they fall into kind of scientific or rationalist mindset think they're above that tribalism, which is not true. You also see that in politics with kind of some, for instance, kind of some of the Brexit debate was Remainers above tribalism because they're smart and they use evidence when actually it's a tribal identity. So there was, back in 2017, a big problem, I think, of people saying pseudoscientists are stupid and people who don't believe in X, Y, and Z are stupid. I felt during COVID I saw less of it than I expected, which was quite nice on the internet. But I still think there is this issue of science writers can be very good at being sort of explaining things, but then the wider audience who are now visible because we've got social media can sometimes be this voice that says, oh, people who don't trust vaccines are idiots. And it's whether or not you think vaccines work, calling someone an idiot isn't the best way of putting forward an argument. So it's now a second order thing. It's not just the writers, it's the people who believe the writers as well also need to be enrolled in this thing of saying, let's all converse on this rather than mudslinging. It's a really hard task, but I think it's one that is different to the past.
And to respond to your comment with a question, how do you, in the ways that you see that science writers, or whether it's science writers, government, or civil society, could be communicating better with their audience who are already engaged, you described, to try and change their behaviour?
I think what I saw during COVID that made me happier was I think that some of the most prominent influential science communication voices were much more saying things like this is uncertain, and you saw a little bit more of the, hey, if someone is confused, that's okay. It's not that they're wrong and they're in the other side, whereas I won't name any names, but there were, okay, I'll name one name, Richard Dawkins, for instance, you know, that kind of, or Brian Cox, for instance, in the past, who were quite good at communicating the actual science, but were also quite good at jumping on the, anyone who doesn't get this is wrong and bad, and we should laugh at them. I didn't see as much of that during COVID, and I think that is to be praised, but also a further step forward can be communicated science with also that sense of not just humility, but also kindness towards people who hold other views, and hopefully audiences would follow.
BJ or Alex, do you have thoughts or comments on how we can improve science communication to be, I guess, more kind of inclusive and more understanding of different, of the people might have very valid reasons not to immediately kind of trust the experts?
I'm going to go with Alex, because they've literally just started a new writers program, she said.
Can you hear us okay, Alex?
No mute.
Sorry, I couldn't hear. Did you ask me to respond?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I couldn't hear Oliver very well, so I'm just reading. That's why I was distracted. I was reading the transcript. Yeah, it doesn't help if high-profile people sort of remark in a very dismissive way. And I think part of I think part of the change that we can achieve is to change our behaviors as well. Now, you know, the way we debate with the other side, our attitudes into coming to the table. What I always say this is that if there is a contentious debate, then we need to enter that debate by taking winning of the table. We need to get in there and really listen to the other side. And we can have a constructive debate by truly understanding what the other side is saying and hearing and listening to them. A lot of the time, these debates are, we have what we want to say, we have all our arguments packed in, and we sit there, we're not, but we're already ready to firing the next argument that we've planned out to say. So actively listening means really going in, being prepared to have your own opinion changed, your own view changed, and you know, having the facts and all the data, going in with that, but to then also dismiss somebody's views and emotions is not productive, and this is not how we're going to change anybody. We need to understand their emotions. I had plenty of discussions with friends who didn't want to have the vaccine, and I understand their hesitations and their worries, their fears, and there's this gray area where science lives, like uncertainty, we just said, it lives in uncertainty. This is how we discover things and how we and create innovation. But it's also a space where people with perhaps different agendas will dive in to exploit our hopes, fears, emotions. And we need to understand that they've been exposed to that, and we need to be more empathetic, I think, and you know, carry on as we do. We can't all change everybody. Like, you can't convince people, even if you have the facts. Some people will just not change their viewpoints because, like I said, once they have received psychological certainty, they are not prepared to carry on investigating and inquiring further because that's it, they're there, and there's no more further investigation. So it's a difficult one. We're not going to solve it overnight, but we might solve it by incrementally changing behaviors, incrementally helping others. And Jay, you mentioned earlier that giving access to resources, information, and again, I'm referring back to the Young Science Writer Award, which is predominantly aiming at schools from state-funded schools in socioeconomically deprived areas, to give those children a chance at winning, but to also encourage those children that science and science communication isn't reserved for the elite, that this is something that we can all do better. And yeah, so that's, I know it's a big answer, it doesn't really go into specifics, but we don't have a specific solution for this, I don't think. We just incrementally a multi-pronged approach from all sides.
I'm interested, we've talked about kind of online environments specifically, but I guess in the, you know, in the environments in schools and with young people that you both have worked in, do you see these similar dynamics of, you know, the things which some of the kids are saying, well, that's obviously true, or that's obviously false, or you know, how can you possibly believe that? Or is that something you see replicated and you have to deal with, or is it very different?
I mean, we've all been young people, right? And at one point we ask questions, and I think as you grow in society, sometimes you don't ask them more questions because it's just the way it is. And I think the power of young people, whether it be in the classroom, in the boardroom when they're coming up, or in their office, or whatever it is in their community, they ask why. And it's about us making sure that when they ask the question why, they're asking why to enough people, and they're learning how to actively listen. I think that was a really great word that resonated when Alex was speaking. I was like, you know, that point around sometimes we talk and then listen to someone to then answer back rather than actually build on what someone said. Online, depending on the social circles you are on, you will find places that people are talking so hypothetically around where things can change. However, what is difficult when you are on the ground and you're offline is that whole point I made about a minute ago before, which is we're exposed to different things and we are only as good as our community or village. So I think work like the Student Review, like the New Young Scientist Award, like other work where they're going into hard to reach communities is super important to level the playing field. Social mobility is something that is going to be a very important point to think about, because I'm not where I was when I was 12, 13, when I was from a working class background in a neighborhood where I wasn't having these kind of conversations, or even if it's not this kind of conversation, but I wasn't having a conversation about what the source of this information I'm looking for. You know, if it's on Wikipedia, it's true. Was the kind of mindset I had, and the Wikipedia has now been replaced with TikTok. You know, so even if we're not trying to talk about online, unfortunately we are in a world now where you can't run away from it. So in offline settings, we are talking about online settings because we're so interconnected. And I think the level up of active listening, the migration of people into new areas where they can go and support and uplift, and then because this thing is so massive, just like Ali said, it's such a big thing, but just a realization that you can be the change you want to see, because in this room you know, whether you're a mother, father, son, daughter, like we are all part of communities, even in buildings we live in or streets we live in, and it just takes a conversation starting to start building bridges and mending stuff. I like to think that we're probably part of the 1% in this room who are really passionate about this. Like it's Christmas time, we're talking about this stuff right now rather than drinking mulled wine. So we are super passionate about this stuff. But young people are not, like, I'll be shocked to see young people from working class backgrounds right now having a debate about whether X information about the World Cup is true, for example. So storytelling, it has to go back to storytelling, but I think the additional point is at the active listening point and teaching people how to not just read, not just listen, but to, okay, I'm looking and I'm critically thinking about what I'm hearing, seeing, reading, or what's being shared to me.
Fabulous. Do we have other questions or thoughts from the audience? All right, we've got a queue, so I'll go 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, hi, it's Ian Bundred, Head of Policy at YouTube. Again, it's probably more of a comment than a question, sorry, but like, I just reflection a little bit around one of the things I think is really interesting about the challenge that we're discussing here is that need, the human need for certainty, right? Versus what facts you can actually give. And it's a shame we can make it, I think, full fact are really thoughtful in this space. But you know, as a platform, on YouTube, for example, over the pandemic, we had to we saw user harm created by people, you know, spreading disinformation around, for example, the effectiveness of stuff. And we had to draw a line around where scientific consensus was, even as scientific consensus kept moving. And that's a real challenge, I think. But I do also think there's an issue here around, to your point around storytelling. What is it that we actually want people to do? And funnily enough, we do a lot. We invest a lot in media literacy, and we've been running a campaign the last year and a half or so around finding your balance, which is encouraging parents to have conversations with their kids. And what we found is, like, we have lots of great tools. Family Link, for those who want it, there's lots of good stuff around on YouTube. YouTube Kids, YouTube Think, lots of different ways that we can help you have an age-appropriate experience online through Google and YouTube products. But actually, the most effective thing isn't necessarily using those platforms, it's starting a conversation. And I think there's a really interesting thing here about, like, we want certainty, but actually the most effective thing, certainly from the research, is the discussion around it. I don't know how you put those two together, if that makes sense. I think it's a real challenge. And I don't know whether, to Alex's point around science being uncertain, that's not really what people want, but perhaps having less talking past each other and more actual discussions about what matters, we might encourage more critical thinking, I guess.
So is there a question, I guess, around how much our response to these issues should be sort of top down? We say these are the areas of agreement, these are the areas of disagreement. Platforms and others should just go out and enforce this, and how much it needs to be kind of from the bottom up. And from
I'd unpack it slightly to, like, we all want certainty, and actually we want platforms to not be spreading this misinformation, for example. But actually, to a certain extent, encouraging people to have critical discussions is also critically important. So therefore, it's about, I guess the question would be, how can we encourage those conversations more? I'd love to hear your thoughts from school stuff, because we do a lot in schools as well. And what we've seen is, 13-year-olds are a lot more savvy around what fake news is, for example, than I expected them necessarily to be. BBC has become a major source of trust. Google search as well is actually very trusted. But then they also don't know what they don't know, right? And so I guess there's how do you encourage them to have those conversations, and whether, whilst the scientific like the Young Scientist Award is a great initiative, how do you do that at scale? Because not everyone wants to write those essays, right?
Yeah, I think there's like almost like two.
So do you want to go ahead?
Yeah,
Alex, we'll bring you in just after this.
I think there's two things that flagged in my brain when you're speaking. One thing is, like, on the very micro level, we talk about conversation, and that's definitely like a big part of the solution, because conversation is a dying art sometimes in some communities, but in some communities it's thriving. So how do we inspire more conversation? I think YouTube being one of the top places people consume stuff is, you guys can do a lot. And then I think that the scale point around conversation is very interesting, because sometimes if you're trying to scale something too quick, then there's questions about who's scaling it, what's the agenda, how are we tracking this impact, and whose responsibility is it? Is it the government's responsibility? Is it all of the social networks and the corporates' responsibilities? Is it parents' responsibilities? We can say it's everyone's responsibility because it really is everyone's responsibility, but when you make something for everyone, no one does anything because we have other problems like making rent and making enough money to pay for energy right now, the food prices going up. So sometimes in those kind of issues, there become opportunities for conversations to be created. So veering a bit away from science, because obviously science was a big thing that affects us today, but it affected us all while we all had lockdown, we had to stay at home. I think something that's affecting us all right now in communities across the country is the cost of living and the looming recession announcement. And I think in those kind of topical moments, obviously you've got the World Cup and stuff like that, but in these topical moments, I think you can find pillars to create moments of scale because people are looking for it already. That's how I would approach it in my own little world. But it's sometimes hard to make people come and drink from the Kool-Aid or drink from that thing if it's not what they're looking for, if it's not what they've been discussing. So there needs to be some sort of matchup around where society is at, what people are talking about in different communities, and then bringing storytellers and bringing platforms around it and then moving things forward. Yeah, that would be my point.
Alex, did you want to come in?
Yeah, there's a lot that I want to say actually. And I think want to pick up on the subject of critical thinking, and I think it's hugely important that we introduce it in schools early on. We have a 7-year-old. She's a good kid, and she's got many friends. And she'll come home and say something, make a statement, and we will talk to her as an adult and say, well, do you think you know, or do you actually know? There's a difference. So, and a lot of the time, we will encounter people making statements because they think they know, but when they actually don't know. So there's a lot of the time, we all culprits of that attitude. But what I would love to see in schools and school environment is an increased attitude towards teaching critical thinking. So we know they teach them well into how to do arithmetic and literacy and English and all that, but it's one-sided, it's this, and it's not engaging two ways. And I think if we were to, start that at an early age where we're asking our children who are like, I'm not going to be able to protect my child from online maliciousness and information. There's just so much so many parental controls I can put on our iPads or whatever, right? So the way I can help her, the way I can weaponize her is to help her think about it more critically and push her to asking questions and thinking for herself. And my impression now, it's a long time since I've been at school, my impression is that not much has changed, that teachers will tell you, this is a subject you need to study, you just tell me what you read and give it back to me to ask questions I'm answering. There's not much in terms of engaging individual independent thinking. And the more we can encourage that, I think that the more we are able to then fend off people who have agendas that want to perhaps harm us or mislead us or and sell us things. But so that's on critical thinking, and I go back to hoping that schools will start implementing that in their curricula. In terms of uncertainty, I feel like if members, we've seen it, so if members of the public are insufficiently prepared to understand analysis and quantifications of uncertainty, they're just going to be skeptical because they don't understand it. So we need to, as science writers and as journalists, we need to do a better job of breaking it down, and it comes back to storytelling, it comes back to breaking down very complex issues. You know, we heard a lot about P values and R values and whatever. You know, to a normal person, most of people, perhaps, I'm making an assumption, I should not, but perhaps the majority of our general public is not as literate within those terminologies, so we need to make sure we guide them and help them come along with the information, understand it all. And then brings me around the third, if I made notes, is responsibility. We all have a responsibility to understanding information that we're given, because we are also producing information constantly with retweeting and sharing. So we are all accountable to a degree to get better at analyzing the information that we're given. So we can't just rely back saying, oh, well, the New York Times has written about it, it must be true. Well, mostly, you know, they have good investigators and they fact check and all of that, but we can't just rely on it anymore. So we have a responsibility to our fellow members of society, and we are also accountable with how we deal with the information that we're given. So that's my 3 thoughts.
Thank you. And I think this idea of kind of getting comfortable with uncertainty is an interesting one, and particularly, obviously, as a think tank called Demos, we spend a lot of time thinking about democracy and political discourse, and it seems to me that this kind of uncomfortability, discomfort with uncertainty, is we very much see this in our kind of political discourse, and you know, uncertainty, everything is very, very much presented as certain until it's completely the opposite the next day.
Can I add a point as well?
Yeah,
I was thinking another thing, in order to scale, sometimes we spend a lot of time making new solutions, but sometimes part of the scale is actually finding things that are working, and you've got data to prove it, and then just piloting that and scaling that up. So collaboration was something that came a lot when I thought about responsibility. So who are people in pockets of society in different regions around the world who are doing stuff in Ukraine, for example, right now, that we can just go, right, this is going to work, and let's do this in another market territory. But that's something that I think is quite important out there as well.
Yeah, question.
Yes, a few questions from online. So to start, we've got Nico McDonald from London South Bank University. During the pandemic, how well do you think that government ministers, scientific and medical advisors, mainstream media, how well did they communicate this idea of uncertainty, and how well did they engage with online debates which challenged certainty around the science and policy decisions, and kind of what would you suggest they could have done differently, if anything?
Did we have any more online questions? Should we do?
Yes, we've got another 2. So
do them as a round, and then we can come
sure
back.
thing. So second one, so this was kind of a bit of a comment. Kids are usually quite good with uncertainties, so they're kind of quite relaxed about saying, oh, magic is the reason stuff happens. And how do we teach that open-mindedness to older children, to adults, and maintain that kind of open-mindedness? And final question from Yasuharu Ono from UCL. And they'd like to ask speakers' opinions on how to foster scientific literacy. So there's a lot of topics about scientific issues on the internet, but we can't respond to each issue. So we kind of, are we falling into a cat and mouse game where we deal with one issue, another issue appears, and is it kind of everlasting, and how can we get out of that cycle?
Thank you, online people. So we've got, how do we get better at communicating, how good were we, and were government and media at communicating ideas of uncertainty during the pandemic? How do we teach kids to be, older kids and adults to be more open-minded, and how to foster scientific literacy? I think just on the online question, on the question about the online debates, I think something that's particularly kind of interesting around the pandemic was that obviously on the one hand you had this kind of rise of COVID causes 5G and all the rest of it, that there was kind of potentially a sort of actual physical risks that really needed to be kind of dealt with quite urgently, but then also we saw, you know, particularly around the early, when we didn't quite know what the symptoms of COVID were, I think it was, you know, loss of smell and taste was something that was coming out on social media discussions, and people were saying, I've had I've got COVID and I can't smell or taste anything, and it wasn't in the official guidelines. But if you looked at the social media, you might actually have a better understanding of what the symptoms were than the official research, because it hadn't gotten that far yet. Alex, can I come to you for responses to any of those 3 questions?
Yeah, I think so. The thing, I hope I'm not misquoting, but the Reuters digital report for 2021 showed that there was increased trust of the public in news and the media, especially the ones that are the more established big names, New York Times, and the Times here. So we saw we did something well because people looked at the more established news outlets for information, and they placed their trust in them. The science policy decision. It's a bit of a loaded question. I mean, I think we did the best we could. It is unreasonable to expect of scientists to know everything, to have all the questions. Now, we talked about how scientific process works, but we were suddenly confronted by a disease we knew nothing about, and we needed time and effort to get through it, and we did it in a remarkable amount of time. I mean, we found a vaccine with a warp speed, and very grateful. And yes, what could they have done differently? What could, I wouldn't want to comment on that. I don't feel qualified to comment on that, to be honest. I'm going to move to the next question.
Fair enough.
Kids, yes, kids are usually good with uncertainty because they don't know the consequences of if something doesn't work out. I think humans become more cautious as consequences and events shape their experiences and their decision making. And how do we teach others to be more open-minded? Well, I think it comes back to how do we teach the general public to embrace uncertainty, like to understand that uncertainty has to be part of life. I've spoken to you about this, Ellen, before, where I said, just imagine a life with no uncertainty. It would be pretty boring and not worth it. Because everything we do, our goals, our visions, the drives that we have, the dreams that we have, they are fundamentally, they're not guaranteed, because uncertainty is ruling, and that's what makes life living, in a way. That's a very philosophical answer, but I think you can also quantify uncertainty. You can look at the relative and absolute risks that surround uncertainty. So again, going back to becoming more science literate and asking basic questions. So, for example, if you're seeing a headline that has an amazing number trying to sell something, ask basic questions. Who's the article written by? What is the possible agenda? What does it answer? What was the sample size? Who was asked? And what type of question was asked? Those are basic, quick questions you can ask of any type of information that you're being confronted with. That should give you a little bit more certainty and the ability to quantify that uncertainty, and then you can deal better with it. There's methods and tools that you can use. Yes.
Thank you, BJ.
Thanks. So yeah, I wrote a couple of things down whilst I need to speak up. I wrote a couple of things down that I thought were quite relevant. I think, as Alex said, like, not qualified to talk about how the government could have done what they did or didn't do, but I could definitely talk on how they made me feel, and I do understand on one level, being too open can produce unrest and uncertainty because people need to be guided and we need to be given confidence. However, I do feel like parts of society were marginalized as we weren't involved in the discussion of what's actually happening and what that's going to mean for our everyday. So, like I said earlier, we don't all watch the news, right? So there are pockets of society who basically heard from someone about what's going on. And that is not helpful when you're dealing with something like a lockdown, something like a national disease. So I think there's lessons we've all learned from the process. There are amazing communicators around the world who get paid a lot more money than I do to help leaders express and teach stuff. And you know, there was like a funny skit I watched many years ago where Dave Chappelle said, "Who do you call in a crisis, not Ja Rule?" I think in this kind of time, it's time you call your Anthony Robbins, you call your Brene Brown, you call people who can really help you empathize with different pockets of society. So I think that's a lesson of what we could do moving forward for all governments, is collaborate with leaders in industry who are experts in helping navigate difficult conversations. Then when the kids and magic point, I think that one was very fascinating as, yes, as we get older, we become a lot more aware of what the consequences of getting things wrong or whatever. Sometimes English is not always great, but I think something that is quite important is trying to inspire play in our everyday lives. And I think it's our own responsibility, especially with the reflections that a lot of people have managed to have during lockdown and during the last couple of years. I think it starts with yourself to seek a lot more joy in life, and through that you should hopefully seek more joy in what you're consuming. I've seen straight away that there's research, there's many apps that have come out of the last couple of years that are boosting togetherness and connectivity. Sit on a board for DCMS where we're part of the Tackling Loneliness Network, and reports have come out that 9 million people in the UK have identified themselves as lonely in the last couple of years. It's a damaging fact, and when you think of magic, you think of play, that doesn't really connect with loneliness. But there are now growing trends that are showing that people are seeking new communities, people are seeking new environments. And I think in those environments is where we can find the magic. So there's been a rise in hiking, a rise in meetup groups, and a rise in apps where people are not just meeting up to date, but they're meeting up to explore and do things that's on their hit list that they really want to do in life. So how do we tap into stuff like that when it comes to conversations around scientific uncertainty or misinformation? I don't think we're going to be doing, fire pit dancing just yet around this stuff right now, but like the dynamic thing, like can these events be turned into a fishbowl? Can we, as people who are all here, can we go into an environment and host a conversation and maybe mix up with a bit of music or improv comedy? So just reimagining how we do things to engage with audiences that are disengaged is how I would personally approach the magic question. And I think Alex answered the question around scientific issues greatly. I just think from a student view perspective, how we approach it, we host pop-up newsrooms where young people in the space of 3 hours get to build their own news articles, they can build their own podcasts, and they can also build their own TikTok that enables them to tell a story that has been fact-checked, that has got a backing of information. And we're now looking at stuff like pop-up press rooms and creating other really interesting short games that people can do in small amounts of time that enables them to have the confidence to go, right, this is an issue, this is how I'm going to talk about the issue, this is how I'm going to understand the different things I need to mention when I'm talking about the issue. But as I said, like, we are only able to deliver at the capacity of what we have funding to do. So it's about organisations like us and others being backed so that we can scale the impact that is being shown in our impact reports.
Thank you. I think we probably have time for about one more question. Okay, we have 3 more. Let's start with in the beige jumper.
Hi, I'm Claire. I'm a master's student at UCL. This is probably going to be a quick question. I was just wondering, like with the online rise of cancel culture kind of thing, that makes the impact on kids, because it's kind of anecdotal, but I've got a cousin who's 6 years younger than me. She goes to the same school I went to, same teachers, a lot of same classes, and a lot of those classes would be fishbowl discussion sessions, and like this isn't necessarily scientific related, but kind of more the mindset of kids these days. And she's like, those classes are so awkward because they're really silent, and like we never kind of have a lull in conversation. People be like, oh, I didn't understand this quote, or what does that mean, or this kind of, and then like other people talk as kind of directed towards like PJ with, like, do you notice that in like schools now? Like, do kids feel kind of like worried that they're gonna say something wrong and be like forever cancelled, kind of like, not really, but like.
I think, like, I've been working with young people since I was a young person myself, and it's evolved over the years. Obviously, we now know, for example, the impact of smoking cigarettes, right? We don't fully know all the full impact of what social media is doing for mass population, where we spend so much time like this. And you know, I'm from a generation where I grew up, and YouTube and MSN and Bebo was there from when I was 10, 11, 9 years old. And one thing I can speak to is the fact that a lot more people I've noticed are within themselves, so they may have things they want to say, but they might not say because, yes, of fear of what someone might think, but also not actually having the full confidence to talk so clearly about what you want to say. So people find solitude in their phones or tablets. However, what I will also say is you can also walk into another room and you have people who have full debates, so energized, ready to have that conversation, and it's about the person who is holding that space, the facilitator, making it a safe space. Like I've been in environments and workshops and rooms where we come in and you get the whole room to write the rules of the room on a piece of paper. Like, how are we going to interact when we get things wrong? How are we going to interact when we like something? And then it's like a collective, that's our rule sheet there, and that does it models behavior, where it goes back to the age-old thing. You can't force people to speak and communicate. You can only inspire and showcase. So I think for those in organizations and in schools where people are finding it hard to talk, that's okay, because it's part of the journey. But it's about the leadership team who are in those places. If they don't have the inspiration inside there to do stuff like I mentioned, going out to other places to go learn and come back. And you know, an interesting point, you said the same teachers like they had their own sabbatical to go and see stuff. So I think I feel for teachers a lot, because you know, they're just like people in the trains and the NHS workers. Some of these people's salaries and the training they've been offered is kind of the same. That's, you know, not every teacher is always leveling up. So it's a very tough role, growing future generations. So what I'm doing is going in and doing stuff, but you've got that knowledge at UCL, you've got pipeline relationships, go in and impact on young people's lives, and that's how the change will happen.
Alex, just wanted to give you an opportunity to come in if there's, I guess, are there reflections from when you worked with young people, or you know, even the journalists that you work with? Are there kind of fears or trepidations about talking about certain scientific issues because of the worries about the reaction it might get?
I'm not firsthand, so I wouldn't feel qualified to speak to that, but there's certainly a hesitation there to ask questions, probing questions of, especially the younger generations of journalists. We've noticed that they find it perhaps more difficult to keep prodding and keep sort of poking for follow-up questions, and so what we're trying to teach and help them with is to not take the first answer as the answer, to go deeper and to go, you know, because with these statutory interviews, people will tell you what they want to tell you, and our job is to be more inquisitive and go deeper and see what else we can uncover, because otherwise we're just transcribing, and that's not our job. And we have seen that there's perhaps a need to encourage interviewing skills, and that's something that we are going to be focusing on in our summer school as well, that we run for journalists and writers. But we also looking to collaborate with universities to go in, send our more established writers, and just help them how do you call out, cold email, and how do you know when you're just being given a non-answer? Because, people will give you an answer when not really answering it, or perhaps, also use techniques to not getting you to ask the question, where they use interrupting techniques, where they sort of cut you off halfway when they know what you're going to be asking. So I think that's what we can do, is to help them gain confidence with better skills, more honed, crafted questioning methods, and that's what we with the association will focus on next year as one of our goals.
Thank you. I'm going to come to the lady in the structure very quickly for the last question, and then we'll have answers and final reflections.
Right, Alexandra Turner, I'm a school philosophy teacher, and I was very interested by what you said, Alex, about the quantification of uncertainty, because it seems to me that there is genuinely disinterested uncertainty and or just genuine uncertainty, and then there's uncertainty which is generated by vested interests, and the tobacco industry, as I understand it, generated uncertainty long after the matter was settled. So part of the uncertainty, in other words, is a sort of multifaceted thing, and I think there needs to be some sort of way of enabling people to distinguish between being uncertain when you don't need to be because the question is settled, and being uncertain and being uncertain because it's okay to be uncertain, and that's the way you make progress. And I don't know how you set up those discussions exactly, but I think students would be so up for it. They would love it, I think, to have uncertainty itself as the very subject of discussion would be. I think they would love it.
It's a great meta question to wrap up our discussion. Well, how do we deal with teaching people about, engaging people with what is uncertainty and where is it just being potentially weaponized? Alex, can I come to you for a response, and then any last?
Do we have another hour for that?
Next year.
All right, I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was Rumsfeld. Did he say there's no knowns, unknown knowns, and unknowns? So this is, yes. I mean, we can. How do we teach students? I think it's a mindset. There's going to be. I'm going to go back to my 7-year-old because that's my audience is there, right? There's no such thing as just good and just evil. There's always something in the gray area, and it is our task to sort of accept it. Like, if we accept that this is our world, that there's lots of agents out there that have ulterior motives, and not sort of from the mindset that everybody's out to get us, but that there's agendas. People have agendas. They might not all be evil, but they might not all suit us. So there's certain things that we will accept, like we accept certain lies from our family and friends when we know their battery didn't really run out, right? When they didn't want to talk to us. It's just a way of politely saying, I can't right now talk to you, but we accept that. We accept certain lies and untruths and falsehoods and misinformation as part of our environment and that we live in. And they're also necessary. And in terms of how do we, we all need to become a little bit of truth detectives. We need to sort of start sniffing out those, it becomes a mystery hunt. every day is a puzzle. That's how I see my day to day. Every day there's puzzles all over the place and missing information here and there. And it's up to me to make decisions and judgments and create my thought process on what I have presented. And I know there's always more to a story or more to information, and but it's a mindset, and it's also an attitude and a behavior. And if you sort of frame it as this is detective work, you know, you are responsible for how your environment is being shaped, then it becomes a hunt for information. So it's you know, there's a story, I guess, but there's no one answer. It's a multi-pronged approach. What I'm saying, there's beautiful initiatives like VJs, and there's us, there's the Royal Institution, there's the Challenging Pseudoscience group. I mean, there's so many small pockets of groups and organizations that are all in effect trying to do the same thing, helping us deal with uncertainty and giving us the tools and the skills we need to sort of go through this jungle of treacherous misinformation and disinformation, and sort of make sure that we are least affected. We're all going to be affected by it, but it's how much we're affected by it. And we can mitigate that by sort of enhancing our skill sets.
Thanks so much, Alex. PJ, any final thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot of solutions out there, and as Alex said, there's people doing the work. Something that we've done as a charity, I just inherited, I didn't start, but the founder was very passionate about making sure that we involve government in this conversation, because one thing we all do know is that there are certain things in life that are compulsory. And over the last couple of years, through the judiciary system, you can petition and lobby and actually get things added to the curriculum or move forward. So, for example, sex education has improved today versus where it was 20 years ago. Still has lots of work to be done. Financial literacy also has improved. It's not where it needs to be, but I remember 10 years ago sitting in the My Bank office, we were one of the leading charities who really pushed the fight to make sure every young person understands money on a very simple term before becoming an adult. And one thing that we did last year was set up a all-party parliamentary group, all with the aim of trying to get media literacy on the curriculum, so that every young person in this country has the ability to go through some sort of training to think more critically better. And it's not just something that's shoehorned in citizenship or in BSHE once a term, but it's something that you do, and we cover resilience, cover uncertainty, cover tools you need to understand the information you're reading, whether or not you're going to become a journalist. But it's just a tool for you to become a more democratic member of society. You need to know where your information is coming from. You need to be part of the conversation. So as just an open call for people, like, that's not something that we own, something we're leading, but we've been able to bring forefactor to the conversation, TikTok to the conversation, and if your organization wants to be part of the conversation, that's something that we can actively do now. But also when I think about the other stuff that society needs, it just goes back to the top line of what I said, storytelling, and it starts with us. So what can you do in your local community to inspire that change? Because ultimately that's sometimes all we can do. And then, you know, sometimes go and lobby government. So yeah, those would be my two thought processes.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think the call for more conversation and collaboration is the perfect segue into please do stay around for a drink if you would like. I think this has been a really, really interesting discussion. Really, thank you so much to our wonderful speakers. I think the questions around how do we celebrate uncertainty, how do we get people more involved in the process of scientific discussion rather than just giving them information and expecting that they'll do what we think they should with it, and the need for kind of empathy and building community around these issues has been really, really clear this evening. So thank you all for coming, and for joining me in thanking our speakers.